Okay, welcome back this week. I swear you guys can hear whenever I'm going to be interviewing somebody on the podcast because my voice gets like super high and squealy because I just want to I'm so excited to welcome another incredible woman that I'm going to introduce you guys to today on the podcast. She is really special in my journey as well. She's one of the first people I have met through Substack since moving to Substack. She has a beautiful Substack called The Rooted Weaver, where she talks about weaving her new life through soul alignment, motherhood, land regeneration, and community. And she is doing all of that post-divorce. And I think we met because she had commented on one of my posts, and I went over to her site and just started reading her work. And y'all, I felt like I'd found like a real life Clarissa Pinkola Estes. I was like, oh, this human. And I remember distinctly, there were a couple of articles on a day where I was just really struggling. I'd opened up my phone and turned to her work, and they were just like so soul-filling for me that I reached out to her. We will link those two posts in the show notes. And yeah, I just reached out to her and I was like, you beautiful human, you, tell me more about your story. Would you potentially like to be on the podcast? Because I really want to expose you to my women. Along with that, I really can't recommend enough subscribing to her and her writing, as her writing is so deeply soul feeling when you read it. And that's something I want so many of you to be exposed to more. Also, she has been sharing on her Substack this amazing journey she's on, which is currently renovating an 1850s farmhouse. Her post where she ripped out all of the carpet and everything just was like, it made me really excited for her, along with her little daughter. So we got to hang out before we did this episode and kind of drop in together, figure out what we were going to talk about. And her story is even more inspiring than I had realized. So I am very giddy and excited to introduce her to you all today and to welcome you, Vanessa, to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. I am honestly fangirling a little bit because I had been following you. I don't know. I had already separated from my husband and moved to New York, but um was in the thick of it in terms of separation and found your podcast and then started listening to previous ones and then following you all the time. And so when you commented on one of my subjects, I was like, oh my God. So yeah, it's all that's to say it's a huge honor to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that is the magic of just the gift of the podcast is it's so me that when other women relate to it so fully and then we meet, it's like we're soul sisters. Because,
Mhm.
it's like if you're picking up on this vibe, we must be on the same wavelength and living, pretty big, different lives. So I'm very excited to get to share more of your story with all of my listeners as well, because if we've got this vibe, I'm sure many of them are going to feel that with you too. So before we just dive right into your story, I love that we're going to take your story a little bit chronologically. But before we kind of go back into the beginning and your childhood, which are important keys to your story, just like they are for all of us, I also thought when I was thinking of, what I would love my listeners to hear from you, one of the things that I've been noticing the most recently in women in my community and women that I'm working with is more and more I'm noticing they're going through their processes and they're wanting to share them. They're wanting to have their voice go out into the world and have an impact in helping other women feel less alone. So you are unique in that space because you're someone who already is doing that through your Substack. And I would love for you to share what drew you into that space of sharing and writing on Substack around your journey.
So I've always been what I would consider a writer. And that's always been something I've been good at, not so much at math, but always good at writing. And, I've been trained professionally and, when I was at the State Department and otherwise. And when I had always dreamed of being able to write publicly in some way, I thought maybe I'd write a book or something. And when I moved last January and took my daughter up to Ithaca, which is about 6 hours north of where I was living in Shenandoah Valley, I just started a Word doc, Google Doc, and started just writing. And it felt so good. And I knew I wanted to share in some way, but I was very shy about it. I didn't really know how to go about it. One of my dear friends, Dana Carlson, she's a brilliant writer, editor, and I sent her my work and she said, V, you got to sign up on Substack. I was like, no, 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 no. And I hemmed and hawed on over. And then I finally did and got such a huge reception, mostly from friends and family on Facebook, let's be honest. But it's still, people were reaching out to me in my kind of outer network that they had gone through similar experiences and asking me questions. And I thought, oh, okay, this is important. And so, we'll get into this, but once I lost my job as well, it was kind of as if I was just in this kind of chronic state of survival last year. And so emotions were kind of right up here, and it was easy to just kind of open the well and have the writing pour out. So that's where it came from. But then I would say also, and I know we'll also touch on this with my sobriety has been a big part of my journey, and sharing your experience, strength, and hope with others is how you recover, basically how you continue to recover. And so when I was doing my annual like reflection, like probably many of us in the new year, like what I wrote down specifically, almost in regard to your show in particular, was I want to be of service to other women out there because I was so trapped. I mean, for almost 6 years, I was so alone that until your podcast, I didn't know of what I was experiencing or that other women were experiencing it. And if there was anything I could do to, share my voice and my experience to help others, then I was going to do it.
Wow. I love you. The word that came up when you were sharing all of this is I was like, oh, the process of sharing your journey becomes its own cathartic
hmm
piece. And I didn't know that you just stuck it in a Google Doc. That's I love it. I also love that going to your friend who is the editor, sometimes that's what it takes. It takes another woman seeing our work and be like, no, 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 this matters. Having that other woman reflect back gave you the courage to like, okay, I'm going to put it out there.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I've found there's wonderful men that've been in my life as well, but women seem to kind of give you that next rung on the ladder sometimes when you need to keep going.
Like, you
And
got this,
she
babe.
played
Just
that
like
role.
4 more inches. Reach a little bit further.
Exactly, exactly. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
beautiful, beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I just had to get that piece in because I'm noticing it more and more, this trend of women like, okay, yes, I've gone through my journey, but like, what's next? I want to share. I even love you hearing more about how, and I'm so excited to talk about this with your recovery process with sobriety, that is an integral part of the process there is sharing while you're going through it. So
Uh-huh.
cannot wait to get into that piece. To kick us off, though, when we were talking previously, coming up with this episode, one of the things I really appreciated you sharing, and that I try to be very transparent about too on my podcast, is childhood. And that the things we go through in childhood don't just magically resolve themselves when we grow up or become adults. Like, they still have a lasting impact on us. So I would love for you to take us back into maybe some of the key things that happened when you were a kid that had impacts that, in young adulthood and then getting married, we will talk about and kind of thread through later.
Okay, so I mean, I've done lots of psychoanalysis of myself of like why am I this way? Best I can tell. So I grew up in the suburbs of DC in Maryland, and I had two parents from very different backgrounds. My mom was from upstate New York, more of kind of a rural background, strong community, healthy family. My father grew up in poverty. He was Hungarian. His family came over from Hungary. He basically pulled himself up from bootstraps and his entire family. And, you know, they were both in the federal government. And so we were kind of transplants. And I always noticed a little bit of a difference about me in comparison to others, just in who my parents were, what their values were, how I was raised. My mom was a working mom, in comparison to some of the others, etc. And my dad was very like enigmatic, and powerful, and he was civil rights activist. He was just a strong personality, a wonderful man. And when I was I don't know, around 5 or 6, I experienced, molestation by someone within the extended family and didn't tell anyone about it. I didn't tell
Mm,
anyone about it until I was 30. So
wow.
that was a deep wound that, definitely shaped a lot of me. And I think I'm still learning ways. And through this divorce,
Yeah.
I think I'm really feeling like I'm more healed than I ever was before.
Mm.
But that is there. That happened.
Yeah, and I want to highlight here that like that secrecy, that feeling of something massive happening when you're really little and not having any framework, adult support, resourcing until later on in your life. I just am like, oh, I am so going through that as well right now. Like finally unpacking in my late 30s what that actually, the impact that that had on me as a little kid. So, thank you for
Yeah.
sharing.
And I mean, we could probably have a whole I mean, I've experienced just so many women that I know have either experienced themselves or know of someone. I mean, it's pretty pervasive, and the trauma associated with
Yeah.
that you internalize, it just comes out sideways in so many different ways.
Yeah.
And then when my father died when I was 10, of illness, and that
Mm.
was, I mean, it was horrific. There's no other way to
Yeah.
describe it. I
Yeah.
loved my father dearly. We called him Poppy. And, he, his loss took, like, stripped away my sense of security,
Yeah.
stability. I felt abandoned. I was so angry. It was, it was horrific, and then my
Yeah.
mom was like propelled into being a single working mom, 2 little girls. My sister's 2 years older than I. And I I was 10, and so within a few years was a preteen and then teenage, etc. And I really turned to drinking as a coping mechanism. I didn't know that at the time, of course. I was
Yeah, at
the
the time
yeah.
you just kind of think like you're just going through life. Like, I don't know how much looking back, I didn't think to myself, "Oh, I've been through big trauma," or, I've been through you don't understand the impact when you're young, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I knew that I was carrying around probably more than the average bear, if you will.
Yeah.
I felt different. And alone and ashamed. That, like, that shame. I've read a
Mm,
lot of Brene Brown as well. I didn't know what that was at the time. I mean, I just had no awareness of any of this. But on the surface, I was kind of, an attractive, intelligent young woman who kept up my grades. I was in sports, but I liked to
yep.
party, and that was fine. That was just what like that was just my
What you
life.
did. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, fast forward to college. I've always been pretty driven, and September 11 and the Iraq War and all that happened when I was in high school. And so I really was geared towards, from DC, it's kind of part of our DNA. So I went towards foreign policy, and was really striving for a powerful career. I had so much, like, combustion inside that I just kind of
Mm,
propelled myself. But as I was doing that, I formed an eating disorder. I was drinking a lot, but I was so compartmentalized. I was living dual lives. I mean, no one
yes.
knew the extent of any of it, to the point that when I was 31, I had lived an incredible life as a diplomat, as a conflict advisor, serving abroad in embassies, working in war zones. And when I took time off to get sober and recovered from eating disorder, almost everyone was shocked. I mean, they had no idea that I was experiencing that. And the level of deception that you have to have and
Wow.
portray.
But that's just so normal. Can we also just normalize that, like, I think the vast majority of people are probably living lives like this, where we are just very compartmentalized. Like, this is my external facing reality that I have to hold
Hmm.
together, my responsible self. And I don't have the tools to cope with all of this pain and the reality of being a human. And so I'm just over here getting by in the ways I can.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, the outside world reinforces that I was meeting my success standards, you know,
Yes.
while I was dying on the inside. And eventually when I got sober at 31, that changed everything. For me, I don't think that everyone that has trauma becomes an alcoholic. It runs in my family. I'm genetically predisposed towards alcoholism. And so yeah, it was what they call like lucky winner, and so, but I was very fortunate in that most people that are alcoholics don't get sober. And
Yeah.
I have stayed sober and I was able to nip in the bud, I think. Yeah, my eating disorder at the same time, which also a
Wow.
lot of people are not
Wow.
able to, yeah, like to be able to have freedom from, eating disorder and being alcohol and recovery. And I think it's because I think we all have positive qualities and then deficiencies or however you want to frame it. I can be super disciplined. If I understand a framework, I will attack it and, run with it. And so as soon as I was given a framework, which I love that you do for your listeners and your women, I can understand it. Then I'll do it,
Mm-hmm.
and then just like I'm off to the races. So that doesn't mean that the pain goes away or that you can speed up the healing process. But at
So
least I was
real.
stayed on the road. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't want to get jumped too far ahead, but that's kind
Yeah,
of where I was at.
that's amazing. And I definitely, where I'm like most drawn and what I want to hear is that touch point moment where you realize, okay, the alcohol is it's not working. Like, what gets you into the recovery moment?
Well, the amount you're consuming. So,
Like, this is too much. I think we've passed the.
um, but no, for me, I've had what I call like fairy godmothers and like, spiritual aunties along my path. And everyone has their different, line that they cross that kind of
Yeah.
propels them towards recovery or not. And I took a sip before I was going to go to work. And that for me was just too much. And so I called this woman at HR and I told her and she goes, "What are you doing?" And called my therapist and she had me go to the hospital. I was not in a great mental state. Like
Yeah.
that I got to that point where I was taking a sip before work. Like I had just come back from, from being deployed abroad. Like the drinking and the eating disorder weren't working for me. They weren't like helping me feel better. But that was kind of the tipping point. And I was at the doctor. I'm seeing all these people come in. I'm like, "Well, what's wrong with me?" And she's like, "Well, you're an alcoholic." I was like, "Oh, what?" I mean, I had never even heard,
Oh,
like, I mean,
wow.
I didn't know that I was an alcoholic. It's so sad. But I had no awareness. And so you've talked
Hmm.
about that labeling and what that and like the power of that, when it's helpful, when it's
Yeah.
not. Um, and that was a tough pill to swallow. And
Uh-huh.
and then I started my recovery. And I feel very thankful in a way because, outside of your program or in like when women or, and men, when we have community, when there's, steps to support you moving through
Yeah.
a healing process and not just beyond the healing process, but everyday living, because that's what's so difficult is yes, it's getting sober and the initial year or so of being of sober, but then you have to be sober for the rest of your life. Right? And that's
Yeah.
when it's really the rubber hits the road. And, fast forward to I decided that I was diagnosed with PTSD at one of my deployments, got introduced to herbal medicine, realized I could walk outside and couldn't point to a tree and know what it was. And just as part of my healing process, started taking walks all the time outside.
Mm.
Nature became hugely transformative for me. And also just being kind of a systems thinker, I was perplexed at why don't I know how to heal myself with plants? Like that knowledge skipped a generation or two. Why don't I know where any of my food is? I don't know how to provide for myself. Like I just felt as if I had all these intellectual skills that were capitalized on, but nothing for me as a human being that
Oh.
was really going to help me in my life. And really that premise hasn't changed very much where we sit, 7 years later. But it propelled me to leave the State Department and move to Shenandoah Valley to take basically an internship at Shenandoah National Park. And I met my ex-husband in the third day that I was there. And
Wow.
until you and I talked about this last episode, you're like, oh, you're at a vulnerable point. And then you met him, and I was like, oh, yeah, I was at a vulnerable point.
Like super vulnerable point. We've just decided like what I've been doing isn't working. Let's do a different direction.
Yeah. So I was 2 years sober at that point, but that's still kind of baby sobriety, if you will. I mean, I was still learning how to be an emotionally sober woman. And what that means is taking accountability for myself, being honest, transparent, doing the next right thing, all those things that equal up to, you not having to go to alcoholism or food or
Yeah.
whatever else it is to be able to to live your life.
Function.
Um, so, but I had, and one tenet of all of this is kind of keeping your side of the street clean and being reflective of yourself and what role you played. And so as I've looked back at my marriage and my relationship, that was really difficult for me because I kept wanting to take responsibility for the way that things were.
Mm-hmm.
And I do need to take responsibility for my actions and also recognize what things are out of my control or what boundaries were and all those types of things.
You were so new. That's the whole
Hmm.
vulnerability of that process is you were so new to delineating between what is mine, what is someone else's. And before we move into, meeting him, I want to come back to just where you were at right before this, because I think this is a theme that I saw through a lot of your journey of moments of the external world is telling me, you're doing great. This is fine. Like, keep going. And yet, internally, what my body is saying, what's showing up in that compartmentalized space away from everything is this is not working anymore. So, can you speak a little bit more to that piece and what that felt like?
Yeah. Well, so as a conflict advisor, I was in a unique position that I would what's called deploy subnationally. So I would go outside of the capital. I would spend weeks at a time on the ground, listening to people, talking to people, trying to identify underlying causes of violence, and then what we call now co-create, but we didn't use that language now. We would basically work together to try and figure out what needs to happen in order to reduce the potential for violence. And I'm seeing people that, I'm supposed to be out there as an American helping. I have all these resources. Guess what? They know how to grow their own food, heal their children,
Wow.
put food on their table. And yeah, like I'm not saying that there's not malnutrition out there, that there's not real food shortages. I'm not trying to belittle the reality there. But what I saw was very capable human beings that had rich community around them. And yes,
Oh,
there was violence and strife, but so much of that violence and strife could be linked back to external dynamics that were precipitated by our own government and other governments' role in the broader global economic social system. So I was like, I don't want to be part of this anymore, and
yeah.
and and I just was having lots of dissonance where I, f- I've traveled so many places, and I I love those experiences, but I was empty inside. I was, I was
Mm.
performing and I wasn't living. And so when I felt the most alive, I moved back home to Maryland, and there's this teeny little Rachel Carson preserve right across the main road. And I would start going there every single day for a year. And I started to recognize that the sun shifts dependent on what type of the year it is. I had no idea that, in winter, the sun's over here, and in the
Yes.
summer, it's over here, that there's, spring ephemerals, like plants that come up in the spring, and and then they die back. I mean, I didn't know that. And I
So
just was,
disconnected
yes,
from nature.
yeah. And so I started like just learning and taking the time to sit and watch and observe and kind of become part of. And I I didn't know what I was going to do, honestly, when I decided to do a career trajectory to shift. I just knew it needed to be with plants, right?
Hmm.
That was the call. That was like the soul call, as as you say. Um and it was so strong. Just like that point when I knew I had to leave. It was undeniable. There was no arguing with it. There was no way that I could rationalize around it. I had to change my life. And so that's where I took the risk, and I left the State Department, and I, took an internship on plants in the Shenandoah Valley. So that, yeah, that was kind of, I hope that gets at some of what you were asking.
Oh my God, yes, that is exactly what I wanted. And this is one of the I mean, it's so beautiful that, of course, you're going to be sharing your journey. Like, we haven't even gotten into the meat of your journey with considering divorce, but that's why I, what you are sharing, this realization that the world we've been sold and the narrative we've been told, which is, especially here in the US, like we have it the best out of everybody. More and more on my podcast, I've been trying to expose these systems and being like, whoa, 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 hold up, check in. Is it actually working for your body? Are you actually feeling resourced and connected? And so I am so obsessed with that moment where you actually got to go and see, no, there are other people in the world that actually know how to provide for themselves, know how to take care of their families, are deeply connected to community. And what an incredible thing that your soul call was calling you away from that, when I feel like right now what we're seeing in the world, at least definitely here, I'm feeling it in the US, is this awakening of, whoa, I don't know if the systems are actually built to take care of me or for me to thrive within them as much as to capitalize or take from me. And starting to go, let's divest from these systems and let's build more local communities that can support
Hmm.
us. So I'm like, you were ahead of your
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. Well, and we can jump to that in a bit about the realities of being, having lost my job, started my own business, and how I'm trying to schedule my time so that I don't lose the opportunities to continue to grow my skills of basic carpentry, gardening,
Mm-hmm.
farming, mothering, that 40 hours a week doesn't work for me actually at all.
Yeah,
And money is real, and I
I
have
know.
real financial needs, and so,
We are
trying
both
to,
walking this path
yeah.
right now, Vanessa, which I keep talking with my partner Joe. I'm like, this is the work that needs to be done. Like, we have to find a new way going forward that is not, like you said, healthy humans. I cannot live in a 40-hour work week either. So, okay, we will talk about this more. I'm like totally vibing on this point because this is something that I'm just very passionate about, all of us understanding ourselves within those systems. So, I loved you pointing out that for you, this was one of those soul call moments, like undeniable. You follow it. While you're following it, you're also going through the process of your recovery process with sobriety, right?
Uh-huh.
And I love that because you shared with me that that kind of gave you the tools and the framework that you would apply later on as well. And then you meet your husband, who is now your ex-husband, but at the time he was going to be your husband. And I think you said at the beginning it felt really good in a lot of ways. Yes?
Well, yes, there was tons of red flags, but there was also, he is a country boy. He has just an incredibly country Virginia accent that I was just enthralled with. He's got like a cowboy vibe, mountain man,
Mm.
cowboy, whatever. And he comes from Page County, which is where we were. It goes back generations. He was farming family. He's so
Mm.
deeply rooted and connected. Everything that I was, and I was a suburb kid from transplants that mostly lived abroad. Here was this incredibly rooted, like full-bred American, and I was like, yes. And so
I can just see your brain. Like that's the whole like it seems good at the beginning because there's this almost like all the things you thought you were wanting in yourself are now you're like, "Oh, it's in this person. This person's
Mhm.
got the things that I want."
Yeah. And so, and also with kind of this, I would say, immature understanding of some of the core
Yes.
concepts